Even as Hurricane Florence was bearing down on the Carolinas, much of the media began battering the president as a lousy crisis manager with no empathy for hurricane victims, triggered in part by Trump's own words about a previous crisis.
And the problem with Puerto Rico is their electric grid and their electric generating plant was dead before the storms ever hit. I think that Puerto Rico was an incredible, unsung success.
President ratcheted up the controversy when he tweeted 3,000 people did not die in the two hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico. When I left the island after the storm had hit, they had anywhere from 6 to 18 deaths. As time went by, it did not go up by much. Then, a long time later, they started to report really large numbers like 3,000. This was done by the Democrats in order to make me look as bad as possible.
He obviously did not feel a bit of grief for the 3,000 people killed by those hurricanes.
How stupid, how tone deaf, how surreal, how insensitive, how offensive to the relatives of the 3,000 people who died in Puerto Rico.
The national left-wing media blindly took these numbers, jumped just as soon as the Puerto Rican governor decided to use them for whatever his political purposes, but they have no foundation in fact.
The media absolutely hammered the president and Emily for challenging the estimate and saying this is all, not Lou Dobbs, obviously, and saying this was all cooked up by the Democrats. What's your take?
Yeah, so the president's frustration, I think, is understandable because there are factors that were outside of his control, perhaps, when this happened, and there's an eagerness on the left and in the media to depict him as heartless. I mean, the paper towel video from last year where he was throwing paper towels into the crowd.
That's been revived.
Right,
yeah.
And that in and of itself is a perfect example of, there's nothing that's not compassionate about doing that. He was just doing it, but his reaction, well, his frustration is understandable. His reaction is not understandable at all. And it kind of disgusts me as an American to look at this. This is not political. These are the deaths of people. This is not Republicans versus Democrats on the Hill. This is serious. These are people's lives. And to push a conspiracy theory with no substantiation or basis from the platform of the President of the United States, I just think is disgusting. And I was really disappointed to see it.
Now, there is an argument to be made, Sarah, that this isn't a body count. It's a George Washington University study, which, by the way, accepted by the Puerto Rican government, that calculated how many more people died in a period after the hurricane than in a comparable period before the storm. But President Trump didn't initially make that case. A couple days later, he came back and cited the GW study. And I think that's one of the things that triggered a lot of the harsh reaction.
That's exactly right. Look, the president, the number that he got when he was on the ground many months ago is obviously going to be different than the number that you're going to calibrate looking back at all the people who died because they didn't get aid or because they didn't have access to medical professionals. One of the things that they cited in that study is that the reason that the death toll they estimate is so much higher is because they didn't think medical professionals knew how to fill out the certificates. So there's no reason that Donald Trump is looking to this. It's just making him seem not empathetic. It's making him seem like he's someone who can't lead for no reason.
You know, the death toll may not be as high as 3,000, but it's certainly not 16 because people in the days and weeks afterwards couldn't get clean water. They couldn't get medical supplies. And so the media are casting this as the president just turning it into politics. And of course, he sees it as politics as well.
Yeah, and he's blaming Democrats for this, which is just another, pillar to the fact that he's trying to politicize this. Look, to me, this makes no sense. There's certainly no political advantage to him doing this, except to try to, I don't know, keep this in the news a little bit longer. Again, I don't know why.
Well, because he feels that, look, this was a devastating storm on an impoverished island, and any administration would have struggled with it. He feels that he's being personally unfairly blamed for the high death toll.
But he's not being that's what he doesn't quite understand.
Some commentators have done it.
Well, I think that's what's so interesting about this is I do think he probably is getting an undue share of the blame from some people, and then that's what makes him lash out to this degree. And that's what's unfortunate, because you're the president of the United States. People did lose their lives. Rise above it.
But even before the conversation turned to Puerto Rico, the media were bringing back last year's narrative about President Trump. He's not good at this. He's self-absorbed. He lacks empathy. Politico headline: Trump struggles to embrace consoler-in-chief role. And that's the narrative, and it's been revived.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. Like, his frustration, again, is understandable. And in so many of these cases, it's understandable because he does get an undue share of the blame a lot. And I really do understand it. But that does not justify this reaction. And that's the bottom line for me. I get that he is not a polished politician who instinctively wades into crowds and hugs people. He's not Bill Clinton. He's not Barack Obama. He is a businessman.
No, he's not.
Okay, well, you would say that in more ways than one. But I also think that the media just don't like his style. And so they're saying, no, this is not the approved way that we think presidents should deal with crises because you got to hug more people.
No, look, maybe on other issues that's the case, but in this one in particular, I think we all three agree on this. I mean, he has turned this story into himself. He has not shown barely any empathy on this issue, and that is why the media is scrutinizing him in the way that he's handled this.
That part about the empathy is a value judgment. And just briefly, Sarah, it is true that President Trump didn't focus sustained attention on Puerto Rico compared to the two monster hurricanes in Florida and Texas last year. But the media also didn't, gave it a fraction of the coverage until it became a Trump story. Why didn't Trump do more? Puerto Rico was just not in the forefront of media coverage the way the others have been.
It absolutely isn't. And I think a part of that, which is why Puerto Rico is lobbying so hard to get representation in Congress, is just because Puerto Rico, quite frankly, is a territory. It's not a state. We're not viewing it as being it's equal to the rest of the domestic states.
But these are Americans.
These are Americans, but you're right. The media didn't cover this hurricane the same way that they covered the ones that were making landfall and the mainland. And so it's not just the president that necessarily took some time to acknowledge this hurricane. Although, quite frankly, now that it's happened after many months and we have new numbers, we should all be, the media and the president, taking it pretty seriously.
Right. It wasn't even close. Great discussion. Adrian Elrod, Sarah Fisher, Emily Jashinsky, thanks very much for coming by this Sunday.